When I stepped onto that stage and held the microphone in my hand, I knew my life would never be the same. The hall was packed with 150 guests, all elegantly dressed, all expecting to hear another beautiful speech about love and family. Jennifer sat at the head table with that perfect smile I had learned to hate, that smile she used to deceive the entire world. My son was beside her, looking at me expectantly, probably imagining that I had finally accepted his wife and that I was going to say something moving about how happy I was for them. But what I was about to do had nothing to do with happiness or acceptance. It had to do with truth. With justice. With 5 years of accumulated pain that was finally going to explode before all those judgmental eyes. Because I had stayed silent for too long. I had swallowed humiliations, insults, exclusions, and manipulations while watching my son transform into someone I no longer recognized. And at that moment, with that heavy microphone in my hand and my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples, I decided I wasn't going to be the silent victim anymore. I was going to speak. And what happened after those first few seconds of courage changed absolutely everything in my life. If you're listening to me now, you probably already know that families aren't always what they seem on the outside. Here on this channel, I share real stories unfiltered, without judgment, just raw truths about the complexities of family relationships. These are accounts that will make you think, feel, and perhaps even recognize pieces of your own story in my words. Because we all have our battles, don't we? Subscribe to the channel and become part of this community where you're never alone and where each shared experience makes us a little stronger. Now let me tell you from the beginning how I got to that stage and why I made the most difficult and liberating decision of my life. It all started 5 years ago, on a sunny Sunday in April. I was at home preparing lunch when my phone rang. It was Matthew, my son, my only son, the boy I had raised alone since he was 12, after my husband Robert died in a car accident. Matthew had always been a sweet, thoughtful, responsible boy. He worked as a civil engineer at a respected firm in Seattle and was doing very well in his career. He was 29 at the time, and I was beginning to wonder if he would ever give me grandchildren. Then that Sunday, when he called with the most cheerful voice I had heard in years, my heart filled with hope. He said he had met someone special, someone who had turned his world upside down, and that he really wanted me to meet her. Her name was Jennifer, and they had met 3 months earlier through mutual friends. Matthew spoke of her as if she were the 8th wonder of the world. He said she was intelligent, beautiful, funny, ambitious, everything he had ever looked for in a woman. I could hear the genuine happiness in my son's voice, and it made me smile. Of course, I wanted to meet her. We arranged a dinner for the following Friday at my house. I spent the entire week preparing. I cleaned every corner of my house, that modest 3-bedroom house in a Seattle suburb where Matthew grew up. It wasn't a mansion, but it was cozy and full of memories. The walls still had Matthew's height marks that I had made year after year. The kitchen still had the same tile that Robert and I put in together 20 years ago. Every piece of furniture, every object had a story. I carefully chose the dinner menu. I made the roast Matthew always loved, the potato salad that was my mother's recipe, the chocolate cake that had been his favorite since childhood. I bought fresh flowers and placed them on the table. I wanted everything to be perfect because that woman was important to my son, and therefore she was important to me too. When the doorbell rang that Friday at 7 o'clock in the evening, my stomach was churning with nervousness. I opened the door and there they were. Matthew with a huge smile on his face and beside him a stunning woman. Jennifer had wavy blonde hair that fell perfectly over her shoulders, blue eyes that seemed crystal clear in the light of the entrance, and a smile that revealed perfectly white and aligned teeth. She wore an elegant navy blue dress and high heels that probably cost more than my monthly rent. In her hands she held a bouquet of pink roses. She extended the flowers to me with that radiant smile and said she was very excited to finally meet me, that Matthew wouldn't stop talking about me. Her voice was soft, melodious, the kind you imagine belonging to a television presenter. I invited her in, and for the first few minutes everything seemed wonderful. During dinner, Jennifer was absolutely charming. She complimented my cooking repeatedly, said she loved the house's decor, asked questions about my life, and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. She talked about her job at an advertising agency, about growing up in Portland with her parents and 2 younger brothers, about her hobbies which included yoga and photography. Matthew could barely take his eyes off her. He held her hand across the table, smiled at everything she said, clearly head over heels in love. And I so desperately wanted to like her. I so desperately wanted to see in her the perfect woman my son deserved. But there was something, a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was just the natural insecurity of a mother who fears losing her son to another woman. Maybe it was irrational jealousy. Or maybe it was my instinct trying to warn me about something my conscious mind hadn't yet grasped. After that first night, Matthew and Jennifer started showing up for dinner once or twice a month. Jennifer remained friendly, always bringing a small gift, always having something kind to say. But I started noticing little things. The way she corrected Matthew when he was telling a story, interrupting to add details or to correct something she thought he had said wrong. The way she looked around my house with a gaze that I can only describe as evaluative, as if she were mentally cataloging everything that was out of place or outdated. The subtle comments about how certain neighborhoods in Seattle were better than others, mine clearly not being on the list of good ones. They were small things, so small that I felt guilty for even noticing them. After all, she was never overtly rude. She never said anything that could be clearly classified as an insult. But her words always left a bitter taste, a feeling of inadequacy that took a long time to pass. 6 months after meeting her, Matthew called me to say that he and Jennifer had rented an apartment together. They were moving into a modern loft in downtown Seattle, close to both of their jobs. Matthew was excited, talking about the incredible view, the luxurious finishes, how perfect it was for them. He said he needed to empty his room in my house and asked if I could store some boxes in the garage for now, just until they settled in and figured out what to do with everything. Of course I said yes. He was my son, my house would always be his house too, no matter where he lived. We arranged for him to come pick up his things and bring the boxes to store on a Saturday. When they arrived that Saturday, something was different. Jennifer entered the house without her usual smile. She seemed tense, irritated. Matthew started to go upstairs to his room, but Jennifer stayed downstairs, looking around the room with that expression I had seen before, only this time more intense. I was in the kitchen making lemonade for them when I heard her speak, and the tone of her voice wasn't the usual soft and melodious one. It was sharp, critical. She said, loud enough for me to hear clearly, that she couldn't understand how anyone could live in such disarray, that my house looked like it hadn't been organized in decades, that it was depressing. Matthew came downstairs quickly and tried to change the subject, but Jennifer continued. She said she would never leave her things in a place like that having things stored there would give the impression of carelessness and lack of standards. She said that a woman my age should be more proud of the appearance of the house, that it was shameful. I left the kitchen clutching the lemonade pitcher, my hands trembling. Jennifer looked me straight in the eye when she saw me, and there wasn't a trace of regret in her expression. Matthew seemed uncomfortable but didn't say anything to defend her, only muttered something about starting to carry the boxes to the garage. I put the pitcher on the table and said in a controlled voice that my house was clean, that I had spent the previous day tidying everything up precisely because I knew they were coming. Jennifer gave a small, cold smile and said that cleaning and organizing were different things, that I clearly didn't understand the difference. Then she turned her back and went to help Matthew with the boxes, leaving me standing there in the living room feeling like I'd been slapped in the face. After they left that day, I sat on the couch and cried. It wasn't so much because of her words, but because of the gratuitous cruelty, the clear intention to make me feel small. And more than that, because of Matthew's lack of reaction. My son, whom I had raised to be respectful and stand up for what was right, had stood there while his girlfriend insulted me in my own home. When I composed myself a little, I called him. I tried to calmly talk about what had happened, about how Jennifer's words had hurt me. Matthew sighed on the other end of the line and said that Jennifer didn't mean any harm, that she just had very high standards because she had grown up in an always spotless home. He said I was being too sensitive, that Jennifer was right about some things that could be improved in my house. Those words hurt more than anything Jennifer had said. because it meant that my son was beginning to see the world through her eyes. He was beginning to see me the way she saw me. In the following months, the visits became increasingly tense. Jennifer always found something to criticize. My clothes were too simple, too out of fashion. My haircut aged me. The food I cooked was too heavy, too greasy. My car was old and embarrassing. My furniture was outdated. My opinions on politics, on education, on life in general were wrong. Each meeting turned into a session where Jennifer pointed out everything that was wrong with me while Matthew remained silent or, worse, agreed with her. I started to get anxious before their visits. I would start sweating, my stomach would churn. I would mentally review everything I could say or do wrong. I was walking on eggshells in their presence, trying to be perfect, trying not to give Jennifer any reason to criticize me. But no matter what I did, she always found something. A year after they started dating, Matthew called me to say he had proposed to Jennifer and she had said yes. My heart sank, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. I said I was so happy for them, that I couldn't wait for the wedding. Matthew sounded radiant on the phone, talking about how he had planned the perfect proposal, how Jennifer had cried tears of joy. Part of me wanted to warn him, wanted to tell him that Jennifer wasn't who she pretended to be, that she was cruel and manipulative. But how could I do that? Based on what? On mean comments and constant criticism? Matthew would say I was jealous, that I didn't want to see him happy, that I was a controlling mother who couldn't let her son grow up. So I swallowed my worries and said I fully supported his decision. Wedding preparations began immediately. Jennifer had dreamed of her perfect wedding since childhood and wouldn't accept anything less than perfection. The chosen venue was a luxurious lakeside hotel with capacity for 200 guests. The decoration would be all white and gold. Her dress cost $5,000. The buffet would be prepared by a renowned chef. Every detail was being meticulously planned. And every detail cost a fortune. It was then that Jennifer contacted me, about 4 months before the wedding. She and Matthew came to dinner, and after we finished eating, Jennifer said she needed to talk to me about something important. My stomach immediately tightened. Jennifer began by saying she greatly appreciated my support for their relationship, that she knew not all mothers accepted their sons' girlfriends so readily. I almost laughed at that statement, considering the hell the last year had been, but I kept my mouth shut. Then she said the wedding costs were getting high and that her family had agreed to contribute $15,000. She paused and looked at me expectantly. I immediately understood what was happening. She was asking me for money. No, she was expecting me to offer money. Matthew stared at his plate, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. I asked how much they were expecting me to contribute. Jennifer smiled and said that as the groom's mother, it would be appropriate for me to contribute a similar amount to her family. $15,000. I was in shock for a moment. $15,000 was more than I had saved in my entire life. I worked as an administrative assistant at a small company, earning $42,000 a year. After paying rent, bills, food, there was barely anything left at the end of the month. I had about $8,000 saved, years of hard-earned money, money I had set aside for emergencies or perhaps to one day retire comfortably. I explained this to Jennifer and saw the clear disappointment on her face. She said she understood, but that perhaps I could make an extra effort, maybe take out a loan or work overtime. She said it was my only son's wedding, that it happened once in a lifetime, that I certainly wanted it to be perfect. The manipulation was so obvious, so blatant, but she knew exactly what she was doing. She was playing with my love for Matthew, making it seem like if I didn't give him the money, I didn't love my son enough. Matthew finally spoke, saying I didn't need to contribute if I couldn't, that they would understand. But Jennifer quickly added that of course they would understand, but that perhaps some of the plans would have to be adjusted, perhaps the wedding couldn't be as beautiful as they had dreamed. The guilt she was trying to make me feel was palpable. I looked at my son, at the man I had raised alone, for whom I had worked 2 jobs to give a good education, for whom I had sacrificed so much. And I said I would contribute the $8,000 I had. Jennifer smiled, but it wasn't a smile of gratitude. It was a smile of victory. She had gotten what she wanted. Matthew thanked me but seemed more relieved than genuinely grateful, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. In the following days, I went to the bank and withdrew my $8,000. I put the check in a nice envelope and gave it to Matthew the next time I saw him. He casually slipped it into his pocket, as if it was something insignificant. Jennifer wasn't even there that day to receive it or thank me. I later learned from Matthew that she had been a little disappointed that I hadn't managed to reach $15,000, that they had had to make some adjustments to the wedding because of it. The audacity of that woman was impressive. I had literally given her all my savings and it still wasn't enough for her. The wedding took place on a beautiful Saturday in September. The day was perfect, a clear blue sky without a cloud in sight. The hotel was stunning, the decorations impeccable. Everything looked like it had come straight out of a bridal magazine. Jennifer was absolutely radiant in her elaborate white dress. Matthew looked elegant in his tuxedo, his eyes shining with emotion. The ceremony was beautiful, with moving vows and live music. During the reception, I sat at a table in the middle of the hall with some distant cousins of Matthew and family acquaintances. Jennifer had arranged the seating, and clearly I wasn't among the priorities. The tables near the bride and groom were occupied by their close friends and Jennifer's family. I, who had given $8,000 for that wedding, who had raised the groom alone, was sitting far away as if I were just another guest. During the party, I tried to approach Jennifer a few times to greet her or take a picture, but she was always busy with other guests, always had something more important to do. When I finally managed to speak to her for a few minutes, she formally thanked me for coming and for the financial contribution, but the words were empty, mechanical. There was no genuine warmth. That night, I drove home alone and cried the whole way. I cried because I had spent all my savings on a wedding where I was barely recognized. I cried because my son was starting a new life with a woman who clearly didn't respect me. I cried because I felt I was losing Matthew forever and there was nothing I could do. After their wedding, Matthew and Jennifer moved into a house. It was a beautiful house in an upper-middle-class neighborhood. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a large garden. They invited me to check out their new home a few weeks after they moved in. When I arrived with a housewarming gift, an expensive set of towels I'd bought with my credit card since I had no savings left, Jennifer barely glanced at the gift before starting to give me a tour of the house. And throughout the tour, she kept quoting prices. The kitchen had been completely renovated and cost $30,000. The hardwood floors were imported and cost $20,000. The appliances were all premium stainless steel and cost $15,000. The living room sofa had cost $8,000. Each number was like a stab in the back, a not-so-subtle reminder that they had money and I didn't, that I was inferior. When we finished the tour, Jennifer sat me down in the living room and said we needed to talk about expectations. She explained that now that they were married and had their own house, they needed to set boundaries with the extended family. She said I had a habit of showing up unannounced and that this was no longer acceptable. I was confused because I had never shown up unannounced. I always called beforehand. But Jennifer continued, saying that from now on I needed to call at least 48 hours in advance if I wanted to visit them. And even then they couldn't guarantee availability. She also said that I called Matthew too much, that he was starting to feel suffocated, that I needed to give them more space. I spoke to my son maybe 3 times a week, 5 or 10-minute calls just to see how he was doing. But according to Jennifer, this was excessive and intrusive. I looked at Matthew, expecting him to say something, to correct Jennifer, to defend our relationship. But he just nodded, agreeing with everything she was saying. He said he thought it was important for them to have privacy as a couple, that I needed to understand that things were different now that they were married. I felt like someone had ripped my heart out of my chest. My son, my baby, was there telling me to stay away from him. I said I understood, that I would respect their boundaries, but my voice came out broken. When I left that house that day, I knew that something fundamental had changed in my relationship with Matthew and that it would probably never be the same again. The following weeks and months were extremely difficult. I followed the rules Jennifer had set. I called less, visited only when explicitly invited, and kept my connections short and superficial. But even following all the rules, Jennifer always found something to complain about. I had called at the wrong time and woke them up. I had stayed too long during the visit. I had brought food they hadn't ordered, and this had been assumed on my part. I asked too many questions about their personal lives. It was impossible to get it right because the rules constantly changed according to her mood. And Matthew just agreed with everything Jennifer said, validated all her complaints, and always took a side against me. Then came the news that temporarily changed everything. Jennifer was pregnant. Matthew called me, completely euphoric, to tell me he was going to be a grandmother. For the first time in months, I felt an explosion of genuine joy. A baby. A new life. A new chance to have a family, to have someone to love. Maybe a baby would soften Jennifer. Maybe motherhood would bring out a more human side of her. Maybe she would realize that family was important and that distancing Matthew from me wasn't healthy for anyone. During the pregnancy, I was invited to participate in more events. I went to the gender reveal party where we found out it would be a girl. I went to some of the ultrasounds. I helped buy things for the baby's room. I spent over $4,000 on clothes, a crib, a stroller, toys. Money I didn't have but that I put on my credit card because I wanted to be part of that special moment. The baby was born on a cold March morning. Her name was Emma, and she was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. When I held her in my arms for the first time in the hospital, I looked at that tiny, perfect face and felt such an overwhelming love that I could barely breathe. I promised myself and her that I would be the best grandmother in the world, that I would be present for every important moment in her life, that I would protect her and love her unconditionally. What I didn't know at that moment was that Jennifer would use Emma as a weapon against me, turning my granddaughter into yet another tool for manipulation and control. The first few months after Emma was born were intense. Jennifer was overwhelmed with a newborn, wasn't sleeping well, and was stressed. I constantly offered help. I brought her ready-made meals so she wouldn't have to cook. I offered to babysit for a few hours so Jennifer could rest or take a decent shower. I bought diapers, wipes, formula. I did whatever I could to be helpful. And during that period, Jennifer was nicer to me than she had been in all the time I'd known her. Not exactly warm, but at least civil. I thought maybe we were finally building a better relationship, that the baby was bringing us closer. But I was completely wrong. As soon as Emma turned 1 and the most difficult phase of early childhood passed, Jennifer reverted to her old self. Only now she had a new weapon. She began restricting my access to Emma. When I called to ask if I could visit my granddaughter, Jennifer always had an excuse. Emma was sick. Emma was tired. Emma had swimming lessons. Emma had a playdate. Emma needed to go to bed early. When I finally got to see my granddaughter, Jennifer was present the entire time, monitoring every interaction, correcting everything I did. I couldn't give Emma cookies because Jennifer didn't allow processed sugar. I couldn't let Emma watch cartoons because Jennifer thought screens were harmful to young children. I couldn't buy toys for Emma without Jennifer's prior approval because she had specific standards about educational toys versus toys she considered trash. Every moment with my granddaughter became stressful. I was afraid of doing anything wrong because I knew Jennifer would use that as a reason to further restrict my visits. And slowly, Emma was starting to see me as a stranger. When I arrived, she didn't run into my arms like I had dreamed a granddaughter would. She would become shy, hiding behind Jennifer's legs. And I saw the satisfied smile on Jennifer's face when that happened. She was deliberately keeping me away from my granddaughter, and there was nothing I could do without being portrayed as the controlling and intrusive grandmother. One day, about 6 months after Emma had turned 2, something happened that completely opened my eyes to who Jennifer really was. I had gone to drop off a belated birthday present for Emma at their house. The front door was ajar, so I went in, calling out to let them know I was coming. That's when I heard Jennifer talking on the phone in her office. The office door was open, and I could hear clearly. She was laughing, that cold, calculating laugh I'd heard a few times before. And then she said something that made me completely freeze in place. Jennifer was telling whoever was on the other end of the line that I was a pathetic, clingy old woman who didn't know when she wasn't welcome. That she had to tolerate my presence because I was still financially useful, that whenever they needed extra money, all Matthew had to do was call me and I'd show up with my wallet open like the desperate idiot I was. She laughed and said I was lonely and sad, a widow who so lacked a life of her own that she kept trying to insert myself into their lives. She said that at least I was good at buying things for Emma, which saved them a lot of money. The person on the other end must have said something funny because Jennifer laughed even louder and agreed that yes, I was completely obsessed with Matthew and that it was kind of disgusting. My hands were shaking so much I almost dropped the gift I was holding. Tears started streaming down my face. I wanted to go into that office and confront her, scream that I'd heard everything, ask how she could be so cruel and deceitful. But I couldn't. I simply left the gift on the floor near the door and left silently. I got into my car and drove without really knowing where I was going. I ended up stopping in an empty parking lot and cried until I had no more tears left. I cried from the humiliation of discovering how Jennifer really talked about me when I wasn't around. I cried for having been so blind, so desperate for acceptance that I had allowed myself to be used and abused. I cried for all the money I had spent, the savings I had given, the sacrifices I had made, all to be treated like trash. When I finally calmed down a little, I knew I needed to tell Matthew what I had heard. I needed my son to know who he had married, what kind of person Jennifer really was. I called him and asked to meet, just the two of us. He seemed hesitant but agreed. We arranged to have lunch the next day at a restaurant near his office. When we sat down, he was visibly uncomfortable, as if he no longer knew how to act around me without Jennifer supervising. I took a deep breath and told him everything I had heard. Every word Jennifer had said, every cruel laugh, every insult. I expected him to be shocked, indignant, furious. I expected him to say he was going to talk seriously to Jennifer about it, that it was unacceptable. But that's not what happened. Matthew sighed deeply and said I probably misunderstood, that maybe Jennifer was just venting to a friend and wasn't serious. He said everyone needs to vent sometimes and that I shouldn't be eavesdropping on private conversations. I tried to argue, tried to make him understand the cruelty of what she had said, but he kept downplaying it. Then he said something that completely destroyed me. He said Jennifer had mentioned that I was becoming too emotionally dependent on him, and that maybe it would be healthy for me to seek therapy or make new friends instead of focusing so much on them. He was saying that I was the problem. That my emotions were the problem. That my need to have a relationship with my own son was the problem. I looked at Matthew and didn't recognize him. Who was this man sitting across from me? Where was my sweet, caring son? Where was the boy who used to defend me from anything? Jennifer had completely brainwashed him, turned him against me so completely that he couldn't see the truth anymore, even when it was right in front of him. I got up from the table and left the restaurant without finishing my food. I didn't trust my voice to say anything more. If I stayed there another minute, I would completely fall apart. After that lunch, I made a decision. I was going to drastically reduce my contact with Matthew and Jennifer. I wasn't going to call constantly anymore. I wasn't going to offer help anymore. I wasn't going to show up with gifts or money anymore. I was going to give them the space they clearly wanted, and maybe without my constant presence, they would realize they valued me. So I stopped calling. I stopped texting. I stopped making an effort. And you know what happened? Absolute silence. For 3 whole weeks, I didn't receive a single call from Matthew. Not a single message asking if I was okay, if something had happened. Nothing. It was only when they needed someone to look after Emma during a weekend they had a wedding to attend that my phone finally rang. Jennifer called me with that sweet, fake voice, saying they'd missed me so much, that Emma had asked about Grandma, and that it would be wonderful if I could babysit her that weekend. Lies. All obvious lies. They needed a free babysitter, and I was the most convenient option. And for the first time in my life, I looked at the phone and said no. I said that unfortunately I had plans and couldn't help. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Then Jennifer said it was okay, that they understood, but her voice had gone cold. And guess how long it was before I heard from them again? 5 weeks. 5 weeks of complete silence until they needed something again. This pattern repeated itself for the next 2.5 years. I only heard from Matthew when they needed something. $1,000 loan because the car had broken down. Someone to pick Emma up from daycare because they had work meetings. Help with an overdue credit card bill. And every time I helped, I hoped it would rebuild our relationship a little, that Matthew would remember how much I loved him. But it never happened. As soon as they got what they wanted, I was ignored again until the next time they needed something. During those years, I watched Emma grow up mostly through photos on social media. I missed her first day of kindergarten. I missed her 4th and 5th birthday parties. I missed dance recitals. I missed end-of-year performances. I was systematically excluded from everything that truly mattered, but always called upon when they needed money or a favor. The pain of being treated this way was constant, but I had become so accustomed to it that I hardly noticed it anymore. It was like a background hum in my life, always present, always hurting. Then something happened that changed everything. Matthew called me one day and said that he and Jennifer had decided to renew their wedding vows. They wanted to have a big party to celebrate 5 years together, a celebration of their love and the family they had built. He said it would be very important to him that I be there, that it wouldn't be the same without me. For the first time in so long, I felt a real glimmer of hope. My son wanted me to be there at such an important moment. My son was including me. I said that of course I would be there, that I wouldn't miss it for the world. But then Jennifer picked up the phone. She started talking about the plans for the party, about how beautiful and special it would be. She said they were planning something really big, with 150 guests, at the same hotel as the original wedding. And then, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, she said they were splitting the costs with the families. That her family was contributing $12,000 and asked how much I could contribute. My heart sank. There it was again. Emotional extortion disguised as family inclusion. They didn't want me there because they loved or valued me. They wanted my money. I told Jennifer I didn't have $12,000. He had started saving slowly again after giving everything at his first wedding, but only had about $7,000 saved. Jennifer was silent for a few seconds and then said that $7,000 was fine, that it was better than nothing, but that they would have to make some adjustments to the plans. The way she said it, with that tone of disappointment and criticism, should have been my signal to simply say no. But I was so desperate to be included, so eager to be a part of their lives, that I agreed to give the $7,000. The following months were a mix of anticipation and anxiety. Jennifer constantly posted about the vow renewal on social media. Photos of the new white dress she had bought. Images of the reception hall being decorated. Details about the gourmet menu. Each post was a showcase of wealth and perfection. And while all this was happening, I was working overtime and taking extra shifts whenever possible to ensure I had the $7,000 ready. I canceled my streaming subscription. I stopped going out to dinner. I cut all expenses that weren't absolutely essential. All to save up that money that would make Matthew happy. 3 weeks before their vow renewal, I deposited the $7,000 into their account. Matthew sent a thank you message. Just one message. Not a connection, not a personal meeting. Just a text saying thank you, we already received it. Jennifer didn't even text. Nothing. Zero acknowledgement that I had just literally given all my savings to their party. They should have been another warning sign, but I was so focused on the upcoming celebration that I ignored it. When the week of the vow renewal arrived, I could barely sleep. I was nervous but also excited in a way I hadn't felt in years. I bought a new dress, a beautiful navy blue dress that cost $150. Money I didn't really have but put on my credit card. I went to the hair salon and got my hair done. I bought new shoes. I wanted to look presentable. I wanted Matthew to be proud of me. I wanted to prove to Jennifer that I could be elegant and appropriate. The day finally arrived. It was a sunny Saturday in June, exactly 5 years after their original wedding. I arrived at the hotel half an hour before the scheduled start, wanting time to calm down and prepare emotionally. The hall was absolutely stunning. White and gold flowers covered every available surface. There were candles in elegant candlesticks on each table. The lighting was soft and romantic. A small stage had been set up for the ceremony, decorated with a floral arch. It was like a fairy tale, perfect in every detail. I looked for my seat and discovered I'd been placed at a table in the middle of the hall. Not at the back this time, at least that was an improvement. But also not near the immediate family. The main table where Jennifer and Matthew would be seated was surrounded by tables for Jennifer's parents, her siblings, and their best friends. I was with some of Matthew's cousins who barely saw him and some people I didn't even know. It was clear that even after giving $7,000, I still wasn't considered important enough family to be near them. The guests began to arrive. The hall quickly filled with well-dressed people, laughing and chatting animatedly. Jennifer's family arrived all together, a large and boisterous clan. I watched them as they greeted each other with warm hugs and kisses. They seemed so close, so happy to be together. I felt extremely alone at that moment, an older woman sitting alone in a corner while everyone around me had their families and connections. Then Jennifer and Matthew arrived. They made a dramatic entrance through the front door, and everyone applauded. Jennifer was absolutely radiant. Her new white dress was even more elaborate than her original wedding dress, with intricate embroidery and a long train. Her hair was styled in a sophisticated updo, with small white flowers interwoven in it. She looked like a princess. Matthew was elegant in a new tuxedo, smiling broadly as he held Jennifer's hand. They were the perfect picture of a couple in love. Emma was with them, wearing a little white flower girl dress, her brown hair styled in curls. My heart ached at the sight of my granddaughter, so grown up now, so beautiful. I tried to make eye contact with her, but she was distracted by all the excitement around her. The ceremony began. Everyone took their seats and fell silent. An officiant stepped onto the stage and began. Matthew and Jennifer stood hand in hand under the flower arch, gazing into each other's eyes. The officiant spoke about the meaning of renewing vows, about reaffirming commitment and love after 5 years of marriage. Then Matthew began to speak. He said the last 5 years had been the best of his life. That Jennifer had made him a better man, a better husband, a better father. That she was his partner in everything, his best friend, his great love. He said he couldn't imagine life without her, that every day by her side was a blessing. His voice was filled with genuine emotion, tears glistening in his eyes. He truly loved Jennifer. That love was real, even though I couldn't understand how he didn't see who she really was. Then it was Jennifer's turn. She spoke in that melodious voice, each word perfectly chosen. She said Matthew was the love of her life, that he was a wonderful father to Emma, that he had made all her dreams come true. She said the last 5 years had been an incredible journey, full of growth and love. That she was looking forward to the next 50 years together. She seemed so sincere, so emotional. If I hadn't known the truth about her, I would have believed her completely. But I did know. I knew that behind those beautiful words was a cruel and manipulative woman who had systematically destroyed the relationship between me and my son. The ceremony ended with a kiss, and everyone applauded. Matthew and Jennifer descended from the stage smiling, waving to the guests. Emma ran to them, and Matthew picked her up, the three embracing in a moment captured by several photographers. The image of the perfect family. The reception began immediately. Music started playing, waiters began circulating with trays of champagne and canapés. People got up from their chairs, started mingling, talking, laughing. I tried to approach Matthew a few times, but he was constantly surrounded by people wanting to greet him. I eventually managed to get close enough to give him a quick hug and congratulate him. He hugged me briefly and said he was glad I had come, but then someone pulled him away to take another picture and he was gone. I didn't even try to approach Jennifer. She was in the center of a group of friends, all laughing at something she was talking about. When our eyes met for a second, she gave me a small, cold smile before turning her attention back to her friends. Emma was playing with other children near the tables. I approached her, knelt down to her level, and said hi. She looked at me with that expression little children make when they know someone but aren't quite sure where. Grandma didn't know, I said, trying not to let my voice break. You're so big and beautiful. Emma smiled shyly, but before we could talk any further, one of Jennifer's friends came and took her away, saying it was time to take pictures with her grandparents. Jennifer's grandparents, of course. Not me. Dinner was served. The food was delicious, as expected from an expensive chef. But I could barely eat. My stomach was tight, my throat closed. I watched Matthew and Jennifer at the head table, so happy, so perfect. And I wondered what I was doing there. Why had I come? Why had I given $7,000? Why did I keep putting myself in situations where I would inevitably be hurt and humiliated? The truth was clear but too painful to admit. I was desperate. Desperate for connection, for love, to be a part of my son's life. And they knew it and used it against me repeatedly. After dinner, it was time for speeches. A presenter took to the stage and announced that some guests wanted to share words about the couple. Jennifer's father was the first. He spoke about how proud he was of his daughter, how Jennifer had always been special, and how lucky Matthew was to have her. Jennifer's mother followed, crying with emotion as she spoke about true love and how happy she was to see her daughter so fulfilled. Then came some close friends, each telling funny or touching stories about Matthew and Jennifer. I was sitting at my table just watching, not expecting to be called upon. Why would I? Jennifer barely tolerated me, and even then, barely. But then the presenter said that if anyone else wanted to speak, now was the time. There were a few seconds of silence. And in those seconds, something inside me simply broke. Or maybe it fixed itself. I'm not sure. But suddenly I was getting up from my chair. My legs were trembling, but I started walking towards the stage. I heard murmurs behind me. Some people seemed confused. Jennifer was looking at me with an expression that was half confusion, half irritation, but still maintained that fake smile. Matthew seemed surprised but nodded encouragingly, probably thinking that I was finally going to give a nice speech accepting Jennifer and celebrating the wedding. I climbed the steps to the stage. Each step seemed higher than the last. The presenter handed me the microphone, and its weight in my hand felt real, solid. I looked at the audience. 150 faces staring back at me expectantly. 150 people waiting to hear something moving and beautiful. I took a deep breath. And I began to speak. If you've identified with my story so far, please leave a like so more people can find it. In the comments, tell me if you've ever been through something similar or what you would have done in my place. And subscribe to the channel for more real stories like this that will make you reflect on family, truth, and dignity. Thank you for listening.